Oskar Dorn clenched the motel bedsheets in his trembling hands as he woke, and instead felt hot sand falling between his fingers. For a few seconds, his senses were overwhelmed by heat and the sound of his own heart beating out of his chest. And then the world, the real world, whatever that meant now, returned. Tears dried quickly on his face, and the screams he'd just woken up from faded back to wherever nightmares went when they'd outlived their purpose. Sweat rolled down his body, and he could feel his skin cooking in the damp sand beneath him. He took a deep breath because he'd held it too long, and still half expected the stale, stuffy, yellowed room and the rank smell of wet cigarettes to hit him. But there was only air hot enough to sting his nostrils. The pain cleared his head, and he pushed himself up on his elbows so that when he finally opened his eyes, he wouldn't be staring directly into the far too bright sky. The constant noise he could now hear over the heartbeat in his ears made more sense when he squinted his eyes open after rubbing away the crust of dried tears. No buildings, no lobby, no road. My brother's bike. It's all gone. Tall sand dunes rose on either side of him, thankfully blocking the sun and, hypothetically, at least some of the heat. Sand in every direction, and a heavy wind overhead. In fact, the only thing other than sand he could see was the faded, creaky motel bed he'd finally passed out on the night before. And for some reason, seeing it sitting lopsided in the sand almost made him laugh out loud. An odd, long-abandoned sense of self-preservation snuck in, and he looked around more carefully, but the reflection of the sun on the shimmering sand seemed as bright as the sky. The burning pain of sitting in the sand finally teamed up with that self-preservation to get him to push himself up to standing, and he awkwardly hopped to the bed a few paces away. The sand, the sky, all the colors seemed off, even through the tiny slit of vision he was forced to look through. A puff of dust billowed up as he landed on the bed, and Oskar held his breath until it dispersed, feeling around the disheveled covers for his bag, his clothes, his gun, or even better, his prosthetic and liner. Anything other than the boxer briefs he'd been wearing when he went to sleep in that god-awful hotel room. Even without self-preservation, he never would have slept there. But the whole damn situation was cursed from the get-go. He'd driven his brother's bike all day as the temperature dropped and a massive snowstorm grew. By the time he'd walked into the old motel lobby, which smelled of wet cigarettes and mold, the wind and cold had made riding the Indian Triumph a growing death wish. Although, I guess that describes the last year of my life pretty well. But no one wants to die by freezing to death in a blizzard. Pausing in his fruitless search of the bed, he glanced carefully up at the red and purple streaked sky. Or dehydration and heat stroke in a desert that shouldn't be here. It wasn't lost on him that if he couldn't think of a way he wanted to die, maybe he didn't actually want to die at all. Waking up almost naked in a surprise desert must have woken up my sense of adventure. But it was hard to get excited about anything when you had dreams every single night. They were persistent, strange dreams. Dreams that didn't float out of memory the way dreams often did. They started gently, like a faint voice in the wind, but over the course of 3 months, they became screams. Just like the ones he'd had the night before. Flashes of a creepy clerk whose teeth grew larger and more rotten the longer he smiled, and a freaking bob-tailed calico cat pitter-pattered through his thoughts. Oskar pushed it all away, reminded by the feel of the sun bearing down on his shoulders that he sat on a bed in the middle of a desert, reminiscing over things that probably didn't even happen. Blinking away the night before, he stopped himself from pointlessly looking around and instead continued his search of the bed, scooting inward and leaning over to pick up the pillows. Something rolled under his arm, and he pulled the dusty 70s-themed comforter back to reveal a long, rough-textured walking stick. Encouraged by the odd find, he pulled the walking stick free from the mess of covers and realized it was a spear, not a walking stick. The end of the stick had a vague, pine-cone-looking pattern to it, a little thicker than the shaft that led into its point, just a few inches further up. Well then. His voice was raspy. The sound was out of place, and he was self-conscious about it for reasons he couldn't identify.